Okay, in this next part of this section, we're going to talk about frequency. And because we already discussed what type of variables we have and the type of data we can have and the type of scaling we can have, it makes sense now to talk about how we gather the data itself. How do we count the data? And so this is called frequency. How frequent does an observation occur for a certain category? And so this could be numerical, or this could be categorical. Frequency tables is a great way to organize your data. So there are a few ways to do that. Okay, so we could do a table like we saw with the De Anza versus Foothill students in the previous video. There's also the graphs that we saw before, which was the bar chart and pie chart, right? And numerical summaries. So there's going to be a little bit of a kicker. So raw qualitative data comes from a list of values, and these values can be organized in either a long list or a table. And qualitative data can be organized by a frequency distribution. So qualitative data can be organized the same way as quantitative data, but we're going to see a little later, like there's going to be a little bit of a difference between the graphs and also the numerical summaries. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the definition. So a frequency distribution lists each category of data and the number of occurrences for each category. Frequencies are just the counts for each category. A cumulative frequency is just accumulation of all that frequency and all previous ones. A relative frequency is the fraction or proportion of frequencies. And then the cumulative relative is just the accumulation of that frequency and prior of relative frequencies. So let's go ahead and look at the example. So the following data represents the number of available cars in a household based on a random sample of 50 households. So if there's 50 households surveyed, then this means that there should be 50 data here. Constructive frequency and relative frequency distribution for the data use 2 decimal places if need be. So in this case, notice that they tell us how many decimals to round to if needed, and that the rule of thumb we don't have to apply here. So only when they don't specify how many decimal places, we always go to the rule of thumb of that 1 decimal past the data. So let's go ahead and observe the cars. It looks like there's 0 through 5. So it seems like a few of the households that they surveyed said they had 5 cars available. So let's go ahead and let's count the frequency for each category. So if I go ahead and count how many households have 0 cars. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are 4 households in that sample that have no cars available. Now let's go ahead and find the frequency for the number of households that have 1 car available. So I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I have 13 households in which have 1 car available. And let's go ahead and do this for the rest. And all we're doing is counting how many times that observation occurs. Okay, and so now a way to check to make sure that you got all the frequencies correct would be to add up this column here. Add these frequencies up, and it should be of 50 total. Okay, so the relative frequency is the proportion of that category that is part of the whole category. So we can see here that 4 out of the 50 cars are households with 0 available cars. And here we can see 13 out of 50 have 1 car, 22 households have 2 cars, 7 out of 50 have 3 cars, and 3 households have 4 cars, and then you can kind of see where we're going. So the relative frequency is this proportion, this fraction. And notice if you add up all these numerators and see the sum of the fraction, it is 50 over 50, which is 1. So the relative frequencies should sum up to 1. And that means that we usually write, and this is where the 2 decimal places here come in, because we usually write the relative frequency as a decimal. So let's go ahead and do that. So 4 out of 50 would be 0.08. 13 out of 50 would be 0.26. 22 out of 50 is 0.44. 7 out of 50 is 0.14. 3 out of 50 is 0.06. And 1 out of 50 is 0.02. And if I added all these up, that sum will be 1. So you do the fraction kind of to give you that proportion and that fraction, and then use your calculator to get a decimal. Round appropriately as it states in the problem, or using the rule of thumb. And then check by adding these all up, and they should be really pretty, not exactly 1 if you're rounding, but really close to 1, like really, really, really super close. So the cumulative relative frequency here would be the sum of the existing frequencies and all above it. So if I wanted to find the cumulative frequency for 4 cars, I would take 0.06 and add up all these frequencies above it and put it here. So essentially, if I took the households with 5 cars, I would take this number here and add all previous frequencies here. Well, what happens if I add 0.02 to all these above it? Well, if I add them all up, I got 1. So I assume that, I assume with cumulative relative frequency, and again, I want to emphasize the word relative because the sum of all of them will be 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. 0.08, there's nothing above it. Okay, and then 0.08 plus 0.26 would give you 0.34. 0.34 plus 0.44 gives you 0.78. So notice all you're doing is taking 0.44 and adding 0.26 plus 0.08. If I added all these three up, I would get 0.78. And then I just keep going. And so I take, okay, if I'm going to do the relative frequency for 3 cars in a household, I take 0.14 and add up all the frequencies above it. So all the frequencies above it, is the sum is 0.78, and I'm going to go ahead and add 0.14, and then I get 0.92. And again, this should all add up to 1 in the very last spot. And then 0.92 plus 0.06 is 0.98, and 0.98 plus 0.02 is 1. So notice that all you're doing with cumulative relative frequency is just taking whatever category you're on, let's say 3 cars, taking that relative frequency and add up all previous frequencies above it, and you put it in that line. But we can work smarter and use all these frequencies that we're already adding up as we go. So let's go ahead and add a column. So now, what would it look like if we did just cumulative frequencies? Well, if I just took cumulative frequencies, so in this case, let me go ahead and highlight these together, and then I'll highlight these frequency. Let me do a darker color. So if I wanted to add these all up, if I want to add up how many households have 2 cars, I would take 22 and add up every frequency above it. So if I'm going to add up, what if I take the number of households that have 5 cars, 1, and add all these frequencies above it? What should be that total? this one plus all of these, well, yeah, you're like, well, 50, exactly. And so therefore, I expect this last one to be 50 in the same sense I expected this other last one to be 1. And so let me go ahead and highlight that here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Well, nothing is above the 4, so we have 4 here. And then now take 4 and add 13 and we get 17. Take 17 and add the next one, 22, and we get 39. And then keep going beyond that. 39 plus 7 is 46. 46 plus 3 is 49. And 49 plus 1 gives you the 50. So the cumulative frequency in either relative or not, all you're doing is just observing the category you want and adding that frequency and all above it. And that's what you end up putting in that slot.